this is like one of the moments where you get to see how Ted Chiang is also having fun as a writer.
Something they believed was, oh, I can just optimize this and have technology do this actually better than humans can.
Right.
And all the science basically disproves that. Do you remember what your childhood was like and what your personal relationship to technology was like? And thinking back on it, do you wish anything had been different?
Welcome to Science Fiction Book Club, a podcast for bookworms and stargazers. In every episode, we dive into the pages of our favorite science fiction novels to break down the big ideas, ask the nerdy questions, and maybe, just maybe, learn a bit about ourselves along the way. I'm your host, Obssa, and with me as always, the one, the only, the immaculate Abu.
That's right. Your automated co-host for today. Beep,
That's
boop,
right.
Pop, pop,
Patented.
Beep, boop. That's right. Patent pending, actually. We're working through the paperwork. Folks, today we are diving into the fifth short story in Ted Chiang's short story collection, Exhalation. We've been going story by story as we cover this entire book. And today we're going to be getting into Dacey's patent automatic nanny, the fifth short story in the collection. Before we dive in, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First and foremost, spoiler warning. We're going to be talking about this story, so make sure you've done the reading before you continue listening.
That's right. And please do share your thoughts with us. Email us at sci-fi-bookclubpod@loreparty.com. You can also join our Patreon at patreon.com/sci-fi-bookclubpod. We post free reading guides, discussion questions, all the bonus clips, and boopers. That's going on there.
There you go. There's a booper right there.
All the boopers you could hope for on that Patreon. You'll also find our Discord, where we like to keep these nerdy sci-fi discussions going with fellow readers in our community, just like you.
That's right. All of those links are in the show notes below, so check that out after you're done listening. Now, Obssa, here's the game plan for today's episode. Just like we do in all of our book club episodes, we will begin by summarizing the reading. Then we'll dive into our impressions and thoughts on the story. We'll each share our feelings on it. And finally, we will wrap up by diving deep into our sci-fi analysis.
That's right.
So before we get into all of that, let's take a quick break. Let's wind up our automatic nannies. Don't go anywhere, dear listener. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, listeners. Let's jump right in with a brief summary of the story for today, Dacey's patent automatic nanny. This short story is framed as the historical account of mathematician and inventor Reginald Dacey, who has invented Dacey's patent automatic nanny.
That's right.
In 1901, Reginald releases this steam-powered nanny designed to care for children, performing tasks like feeding, cleaning, and basic supervision. Reginald sees his invention as a revolutionary way to optimize child rearing and avoid the pesky issues of overly emotional and inconsistent human female nannies. Alas, the success of the mechanical nanny is short-lived when Dacey's reputation is never quite able to recover from an incident where a malfunctioning automatic nanny killed a child.
Oh, that's a tough look. You're really not going to bounce back from that.
I don't think so. I think Maytag would go out of business if dishwashers suddenly turned on the children.
That's true. That's true. Well, years later, Reginald's son Lionel attempts to revive both his father's invention and his father's reputation by trying to prove that the automatic nanny does indeed work. But alas, he also fails because the adopted child, Edmund, that he used this nanny on, ends up in a correctional institute for young children.
That's right.
Edmund was raised by this nanny for 2 whole years. For the first 2 years of his life, this automatic nanny raised the child. And as a result, he is physically, emotionally, and mentally underdeveloped. In fact, the caretakers at this institute have basically found it impossible to get the boy to respond to any kind of treatment or any kind of human interaction.
Luckily, a consultant named Dr. Thackeray Lambshead theorized that the boy would respond normally to an automatic nanny. What Edmund needed was not more contact with a person, but more contact with a podcast, with a machine, with a machine.
A machine.
To quote. Lamb said convinced Lionel into selling him an automatic nanny to help the boy, and Edmund immediately actually began to grow. He began to grow physically healthy. It wasn't until years later that technology advanced enough for Lamb's head to set up a mechanical communication system to help the boy also grow mentally.
Yeah.
So it turns out Edmund was a perfectly normal boy, except for the fact that he would only respond to mechanical nurturing.
Wow. Okay. He just needed the right way to communicate with Edmund. And it turns out it's got to be mechanical communication.
Yeah.
He doesn't respond to any sort of human nurturing. So the story wraps up when Dr. Lambshead shows Lionel the progress that Edmund has made over these years at the Institute, and thanks to the mechanical nurturing that the boy is now undergoing, and Lionel is overcome with emotion.
Yeah.
When he witnesses how much progress his, as we learn, illegitimate child, Edmund Dacey. Yeah. He's overcome with emotion when he sees how much progress his child has made.
Yeah.
And Lionel, to his credit, immediately takes the boy home.
Yeah.
Checks him out of the Institute, takes him home, and spends the rest of both of their lives caring for him through machine-mediated interactions.
Right.
Which, given the circumstances of their lives in this story, is probably as close to happily ever after as these two were going to get.
That's right. This is a very steampunk happy ever after. But
Indeed.
But yes, father and son rekindled.
That's right. So that is Dacey's Automatic Nanny. Obssa, what did you think of this short story? Did it leave an impression on you?
Yeah, this was an interesting one. I think what I most appreciated about this, just kind of in the broader collection of Ted Chiang's stories here, is how inventive he can be with the framing and like the use, like just kind of how he constructs a story. This one is told obviously from the perspective of, essentially somebody that's coming to understand and learn about this patent automatic nanny.
Yeah.
And at the end, we get kind of like this little bit of a teaser that you're kind of reading the inscription on one of the last remaining automatic nannies, like almost at a museum or something.
Like in a museum, right?
Yeah,
right.
which I really enjoyed. Like I think that this is like one of the moments where you get to see how Ted Chiang is also having fun as a writer, getting to explore different choices and directions while still telling an ultimately intriguing story. I don't know that it philosophically like resonated with me in the same way that some of his others do, where they're just such far-reaching questions. This one almost feels like, it's like a tragic comedy where you're like, on the one hand, kind of you're saddened and horrified for this child who's leading this really kind of bare life until until the nurses are able to figure out what sort of attention he needs. But I don't know that I grappled with kind of a deep technical philosophical problem in the same way as we have with other stories that Ted has in this collection. But altogether, I mean, it's fun. It's inventive. This is a cool story.
Agreed. I'm in exactly the same boat. I greatly enjoyed the short story.
Yeah.
But I do think it is much more simple and smaller in scope than some of the other stories we've covered thus far on the podcast and the other stories in this collection. But like you're saying, I think it's still just so well written and so well constructed. The framing device of the story itself is really interesting and makes it that much more fun to read. And I found it in particular interesting that this one is positioned. I wonder if this is intentional, positioned right after life cycle of software objects. Because it really seems like whenever these stories were written, parenting was really on Ted's mind.
Right.
Given the central themes of both of these stories.
Yeah, totally.
And, this naturally got me wondering if Ted Chiang is our father. And a bit of Googling reveals that he doesn't seem to have any children, at least, none publicly.
And
well,
so we're all Ted's children.
That's right. In a way, I certainly consider myself Ted Chiang's child.
Father!
Daddy! I mean, father! My sci-fi daddy, Ted Chiang. So, given the context of him not having any children and not actually being a father and a parent himself, I find it that much more interesting that he's able to explore this intersection of technology and raising children in such meaningful ways. You know, it just reveals once again the type of deep thinker that he is and the way he's able to look at technology and how humans interact with it and weave that into such a fascinating story. I do want to say I don't think this is one of the stronger stories in this collection. Again, a bit more simple, smaller in scope. I think a particular weakness of this story is that it introduces like a lot of characters very quickly. You know, there's the doctor, there's the baby who died. Like there's a lot of name dropping happening, which makes it sort of hard to figure out who the emotional core of the story is supposed to be. Is it Lionel? Is it Edmund? Am I supposed to sort of like is the vehicle of the story Edmund's journey in the Institute? Right. So I did find that a little bit disappointing.
It is, to your point, it's interesting contrasting this with, comparing and contrasting this with Life Cycle, because I think at the end you could almost suggest that there's a similar thesis, perhaps, or at least like kind of a tangential point at the in that story as well, where it's like there's no shortcut to raising kind of full, capable, sentient beings, be they children, human children, or in the case of Life Cycle, obviously software, which is it's interesting.
Yeah, and maybe that's sort of where my disappointment lies. Is like at least Life Cycle had a wrinkle, right? It complicated the basic thesis of this is how you should raise children. There are no shortcuts. Technology won't be the solution. But there were some thorny questions about AI and whether or not AI is sentient and deserves rights. Like there were some complications and layers in Life Cycle that I think like don't really exist here. It's like, yeah, man, you should have raised Edmund like a normal human being. No one is sort of like arguing against that. Whereas I think in Life Cycle, you could kind of argue a couple of different sides of the story. This one, I think, again, much more simple, not much depth. And it not many layers of complexity when it comes to the overall point of the story.
Totally. Yeah, I don't think there are many readers who are walking away from this thinking, you know what? Let's bring this back. Let's try this again.
Let's do it.
Let's do that. Let's do that.
I'm going to put my order in now for an automatic nanny.
Totally.
Ship it
We're
to
all
my
basically
house.
on the same page by the end of the story. There isn't as much of a kind of an open dilemma or question that you're left pondering, when you're unable to sleep at night or whatever the case might be.
Exactly. Yeah, I think we're generally in the same boat there. But I am excited to get into my takeaway. Because this story led me down a pretty fun rabbit hole. And speaking of the takeaway, that's the summary of the story. Those are some of our thoughts. Let's take a quick break. And then when we come back, Obssa, we'll get into our sci-fi analysis and talk a little bit about what the data reveals about real world children and how they use technology and how it's affecting them today.
Exciting. All right. Welcome back, listeners. Without further ado, a phrase we haven't used in so long.
That's true. We've been good about not using that one.
Pretty good
that
about
one's
that
usually
one.
A crutch.
Abu, why don't you unpack the story for us a bit and share the analysis you've got?
Yeah. Okay. So for this takeaway, like I said earlier, I got into some research about technology and its effect on children.
Yeah.
And rather than focusing on the idea that children need human connection to develop, which, again, as we said in our thoughts earlier, seems to be a bit of a foregone conclusion. Like, we kind of all agree with that. I want to instead turn our attention to Edmund Dacey and his experience. Because this quote in particular in this short story really caught my attention. It's the scene where Lionel is overcome with emotion. He's watching the progress that his illegitimate child has made, and he realizes that he has created, quote, a child so wedded to machines that he could not acknowledge another human being, end quote.
Interesting.
That to me raised some alarm bells because that feels like an eerily urgent issue in 2025,
Totally present.
given how much time kids are spending in online spaces, how
Totally.
online spaces have taken over much of the physical social spaces that the kids normally would have spent their time in.
Yeah.
And how much screen time has affected all of us, frankly, but in particular affects young children who are
Yeah.
more susceptible.
Yeah.
So I did some digging because I was like, all right, my gut instinct is like, ew, screens, never let a kid near a phone ever.
Yeah. Doomerism. Classic.
Exactly. And I was like, okay, let me see if the data supports my like gut instinct to just be like, kids should not have screens. Understandably, my research led me down a rabbit hole, and the data paints this very complicated and nuanced picture of how all of this shakes out. But there are some notable trends, both good and bad, some of which I wanted to like highlight in today's conversation. So one thing I found interesting was that studies show that screen time, any screen time before 12 months of age, like we're talking like newborn baby and its first year of life, any amount of screen time has a high risk of delaying language abilities, of the ability for the child to develop its vocabulary and speak its first words. And that effect doesn't really go away based on these studies until around the 17, 18-month mark.
Oh, wow.
So actually, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the U.S. Center for Disease Control, the CDC, has screen time guidelines for children of all ages. And these two organizations recommend that babies should not be using screens or near screens before 18 months old. Like just an absolute no screens at all for a child that young because of the risks for their development.
Yeah, you almost wish that we didn't need our institutions to tell us this.
To say that? Yeah.
But we are so wedded to our machines.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other interesting factoids that I read was how, especially children at this young age, they do a lot of mimicking, right? Like you do peekaboo, they learn peekaboo, they learn like motor functions with their hands and their face and their
it's
bodies.
All the mirror
like
neurons, they're like reflecting back what they see.
Yes, they're reflecting back what their parents are doing.
Totally.
If a child looks at the like a peekaboo on a screen, it has a much more difficult time mimicking that physical action. Like there's the screen becomes this disconnect for the child to learn like physical mimicking and body language.
Wow.
Okay, so moving on from newborns and tiny little human beings at just 18 months old, things get a little bit more complicated and a little bit more nuanced once you hit the 2 to 5 year range. And basically, like, the gist of all of this research that I was finding about this age range can be summarized as quality over quantity. At this age, for example, like exposure to 2+ hours of screen time a day can increase a lot of issues in children. Behavioral problems that can delay the children hitting certain milestones in their childhood and in their mental development. So you have to limit the screen time at that age. It's got to be like maximum 1 hour, I think, is what the CDC recommends for 2 to 5 year olds. 1 hour per day. All of the research, all of these studies, the CDC, they all recommend that it's like very curated educational content that is moderated by the parents. Like the parents should be there watching the content alongside the 2-year-old and sort of like explaining and expanding on what's going on so that they're learning from it. It's not just something that they're vegging out and absorbing.
Yeah, like passively taking in with no
passive,
engagement.
right? It's passive versus active, right? Like it you really should be taking an active participation in any screen time your child has at this age from 2 to 5 years old. But that does actually have benefits. If it is educational content, kids that are like sort of getting ready for school, right? Like if you're going to be in preschool by age 5, if you spend your years before that watching educational content and your parents being actively involved in teaching you that stuff, studies do show that it helps these children identify things like numbers, letters, and shapes faster than kids who watch no educational content during these years. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to like put something on and watch it with your
Interesting.
kids at this age. It
Yeah.
just has to be very limited and very curated.
Yeah. Which is the exact opposite direction that we have gone with our like channels for information. Like there's
Yeah.
just an overwhelming amount of
Yeah.
content out there. So yeah, the curation challenge is interesting there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like to the point of like how much content there is. I think I recently came across a story about there being all of a sudden a number of kind of AI slop fake
Oh God.
YouTube like channels that are
Yeah.
centered, they're like focused on children. So they'll
Kids,
do things
yeah.
like help you practice the alphabet and do numbers and whatever, and they're really emulating the style of successful kind of popular programming for kids. But because it's AI slop, sometimes there'll just be mistakes. Like they'll pronounce letters the wrong way, or they'll have numbers that are upside down. And if you're not actively watching with your child, then suddenly they're being taught that a bee is backwards, or like a dog
Totally,
meows,
totally.
or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, that's absolutely a good point. Like there's the proliferation of children's content
Yeah,
has exploded, and
yeah,
that naturally means the quality has degraded.
yeah.
And so that makes it even more urgent that
Right,
parents are actively watching these things alongside their kids and
right.
curating that experience for them
Yeah,
at such a young and delicate age.
yeah.
Okay, so moving on, let's assume that our sci-fi book club baby has now grown beyond 5 years old. We've made it this far. We've been good parents. Um, Once we're past the 5 year mark, it's kind of a free for all. It's very hard to basically figure out how kids respond to technology once they're into like childhood and adolescence, because at that point a kid is like has developed their own personality and traits and opinions, and so every child is going to kind of respond to technology differently and
Right,
uniquely, and it's
right.
again the responsibility ultimately like falls on the parents to
Hmm.
be very active in that use of technology and judge when their child is ready for things like social media or their
Right.
own phone, and that it becomes very case by case once you get into 5 to 10 years old,
Mm,
and then especially on into teenage.
right.
And bringing it back to the short story today, Edmund Dacey is perhaps an extreme example of this phenomenon, but based on the research that I did, the science does back up the ultimate lesson of this short story, that a parent needs to be involved at every stage of a child's life and carefully mediate their use of technology
Right.
to make sure that they are reaping the benefits of this technology
Yeah.
and minimizing the potential harm.
Right.
That's something you do for your kid's entire childhood,
Right.
until
Right.
they're an adult, and then they're allowed to consume as much AI slop as they choose. They're an adult at that point. That's up
Yeah,
to them.
totally. Yeah, it's true. It's not the case that there's some level of technological maturity at which point you can just go hands off,
Right,
no matter
exactly.
how advanced our robotics gets, it's still essential for you to be your child's parent, for you to be like intimately involved in their kind of child rearing.
That's right. And to have that human to human contact, right? Like, I think the Daceys, something they believed was, oh, I can just optimize this
Yeah.
and have technology do this actually better than humans can.
Right.
And all the science basically disproves that.
Yeah.
Like, literally, humans are biologically wired to be raised by other humans. And so you just can't fucking create a robot to do that. It's just always going to be bad.
Yeah, totally.
And, sadly, that is a lesson that Lionel Dacey learned the hard way in this
Yeah.
short story.
Yeah.
But a really important takeaway for any current parents or future parents.
Yeah.
To wrap up this takeaway, I wanted to ask you, Obsa.
Yeah.
Neither of us are parents, to be clear.
Yeah.
Hello.
Well, just the dog. I
We're
am
about to. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
puppy fathers. We're puppy fathers.
Pet parents for sure.
That's
For
right.
sure.
That's right.
Um,
No human children,
but
though.
no human children. We're not raising any human children. But I guess we both were children at some point in our lives.
I'm told. Yeah.
And I'm just curious. Do you remember what your childhood was like and what your personal relationship to technology was like? And thinking back on it, do you wish anything had been different?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I remember the time before technology. I remember the
Mm-hmm.
time before having a PC in our home.
Yeah.
And I guess, I don't remember a time pre-television, to be fair, or pre-radio.
Me neither. Me neither.
So all of those things were certainly present in my childhood. And soon enough, so were things like Game Boys. So like that's what I remember from childhood. It was like, yeah, I didn't have a phone, but I did have a Game Boy and a
Yeah.
Game Boy Advance and every other generation that eventually came out. But I mean, to the point of this story, my parents were definitely quite attentive to how much time we had with those devices. So
Nice. Yeah. Great.
we couldn't use them like for the bulk of the week. It was like really a weekends only sort of thing. And the same with television also, actually. So I grew up in a household where during the school week, you don't watch television. Like during the school week, you're doing
Wow.
school
Okay.
basically, and you can like
Yes.
hang out with friends. You can go bike. You can play sports, whatever the case might be. But sitting in one spot and kind of obsessively watching television or playing a video game or something was essentially forbidden. And I like, yeah, probably then I would have said, this is terrible. All of my
Yep.
friends get to, have this experience all the time,
Exactly. Exactly.
But looking backwards, I mean, I certainly appreciate it. Like, I commend my parents for that style of kind of child rearing. So it's interesting kind of thinking about the like nieces and nephews I have now, where they have
Right.
really nothing in common with that experience. Like they all have phones, and they're in many ways much more adept at navigating like the current ecosystem of tech things than even I am. So it's tough. I don't know quite like how I feel about that, because I think
Right.
generations do change in ways. Like when I think about this example of well, I guess when I just think about like what happens when so much of your childhood is spent kind of online or using technology, there's a part of me that thinks that they are adapting in some ways. And I see this happening with, again, like close relatives where they are
Yeah.
very adept at doing things, in the apps and kind of tech that they use. And that's a skill. Like that's a difference in our generations and in how we came to experience the world. I'm not totally convinced immediately that it's like all bad, like it's net harmful. But that said, I'm obviously still in the camp that we should be very conscious of the effects it's having and be vigilant against the kind of severe and extreme harms.
Yeah. I'm kind of in the same boat. It sounds like we had very similar childhoods and
Oh
rules
yeah,
at home with our
yeah,
parents.
yeah,
And similarly, looking back, I hated it. Like we
yeah.
never had cable.
Right.
I don't know if we have to explain cable to our listeners if they know what that is these days. Um,
Yeah.
but we were never allowed to have cable growing up.
Right.
And so we only had like local television that you could get on the fucking bunny ears, right? You had to like wave it around and
Right.
reposition it to like get the blurriest photo.
Yeah, I remember
Um,
that.
but we had like local stations
Yeah.
and we had mostly like PBS.
Yeah.
And so we could watch things like do you remember that
There was like the
do
math
you remember
one.
that like cyberspace show where
Yes,
they did
that's
math
what I
and
was.
stuff?
Yes, I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day, and I couldn't remember what it was called. But
I think it was called Cyber Chase now that I think
Cyber
about it.
Chase, yes,
Right?
Yes, dude,
Yeah.
Cyber Chase, holy shit, yeah,
Yeah.
Cyber
So-
Chase,
Cyber
Wow.
Chase, like that's a flash from the past.
Yeah.
Arthur,
yes,
obviously Sesame Street. Like
Totally.
we basically had what was available on public television and primarily what was available on PBS.
Yeah.
And very limited TV watching time as well before the remote was taken away from us.
Right.
And looking back, I appreciate that. At the time, of course, I hated it, but I was a kid, and so I didn't know any better. I am very glad my parents did that. I'm proud of them for enforcing those rules because I think it encouraged me to like do things physically with my hands. Like my
Totally.
mom would do a lot of arts and crafts with us as kids.
Nice.
Because we didn't have a lot of toys, but we would use like cardboard and like paper and create things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do wonder if kids still get that. Again, I'm not
Yeah.
a parent, so it's hard for me to like speak from experience. I do have
Right.
young children in my lives, like nieces, nephews, cousins,
Right.
To your point, I think it's really hard to tell. And a
Yeah.
lot of the research I was doing kind of points at this too, is like, it's just really hard to nail this down
Totally.
because like kids are very adaptable.
100%.
Every parent is dramatically different from every other parent.
Yeah.
So like it's very hard to generalize the data
Right.
because situations are so unique, household to household, kid to kid. It's fascinating, it's a really tough question. And honestly, like props to all the parents out there going through it right now. I can't imagine what the fuck.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Sometimes you'll hear the story about like the Facebook exec that doesn't let their kids use Facebook,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
yeah, you kind of wonder. It's like, yeah, some of these things it's hard to kind of reach a conclusion on, but there are some parameters I feel like that feel sensible, and there's something between the extremes. Like you don't need to
Yeah.
be, like I've seen toddlers in strollers with a phone in their hands, and
It unhinged. Yeah.
going forward, I'll probably smack those out now.
Hell yeah, brother. The
But
CDC says no phones between
the
before
data
18
shows
months, bitch.
0 to 2. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, the broader question still stands. It's it's hard to know kind of what the shape of childhood should be exactly.
Yeah. All right, folks. Well, as always, we have homework for you for the next episode. We are continuing our journey through Exhalation by Ted Chiang. So, for the next episode of Science Fiction Book Club, make sure you've read the next short story. This one is titled The Truth of Fact, The Truth of Feeling.
That's right.
This is also another long one in this book, so give yourself plenty of time to finish it.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're wondering how much time you have to do any of the reading, don't worry. Check out the link in the show notes below to our Season 3 reading schedule. We have the entire season laid out with exact due dates and exact chapters and when you have to have them read by and what books are coming up next so that you can get that Holden at the library in time to read along with us.
That's right. Well, friends, you can partake in a grand scientific undertaking by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, this podcast works night and day, requires no separate quarters, and cannot steal. Yet.
Yet.
Yes.
Our
will
goal
be
is
mining
to
Bitcoin.
steal your hearts. So
That's
if we're getting close, let us know.
And then you too can be Ted Chiang's children. Join our
Welcome to
cult.
the cult of Ted Chiang.